Hi everyone, welcome back to Around the Business World with Jia. Today I'm here with a very special guest, Mr. Mukund Rajan. Before I dive into the interview, let me give you a small introduction about Mr. Mukund Rajan or Dr. Mukund Rajan. He is the founder of Ecube. He was also the first brand custodian of the Tata Group. And I'm pretty sure you might have definitely heard of his book, The Brand Custodian: My Years with the Tatas. He was also the Chief Ethics Officer and Chairman of the Tata Global Sustainability Council till 2018. And prior to that, he led the private equity at Tata Capital. Now, I'm so glad you can make it for this particular interview. And let me know when you're ready, and we can begin with the interview questions.
Good to go. Thank you.
All right, perfect. So this interview is divided into three parts: your childhood, your work life, and then a bit more fun and more or less working client questions, but a bit more to the fun side. All right, so let's start with your childhood. So, can you describe your childhood in a few words
Few words.
or line?
Um,
Sorry.
Relatively stress-free, full of games and sports, with some watchful elder siblings. Um, I wasn't particularly studious in school. I was always looking for excuses to bunk, but really was given a lot of space and freedom by my parents and family to evolve the way I thought I wanted to. So very few constraints and great deal of freedom and fun.
Definitely, that's lovely. All right. So, you mentioned that you have a sibling. Has do people often mistake you for Raghuram Rajan? And when was the last time someone mistook you for your brother? Because you look pretty similar.
Not the people who know us, obviously, and we are of slightly different heights, for instance, and slightly different build. But yes, from a distance, sometimes we could look similar for people who've not met either of us. So once I was at this airport when I got off this flight, and somebody came up to me and tapped me on the shoulder and said, I was looking at you right through the flight. You look exactly like the former RBI governor. And then I told him I was his brother. And for a moment, he thought I was pulling his leg. And then I showed him my visiting card and the surname. And then he realized that, it was a genuine misunderstanding. And we were, in fact, brothers as well. So this was maybe a few months back when flights were still operating.
Wow, okay. That's pretty decent. All right. Now, my next question. You've studied all over the world, from Belgium to India to UK. By far, what has been your most fascinating experience and why?
I would probably say that the UK, where I was studying, doing my master's and then my doctorate at Oxford University, was probably the most interesting because I was at an age when I was open to learning, and there was so much new stuff that I was picking up in the master's and then the doctorate, and very different environment from anything I'd experienced prior to that. So in India, I was at IIT, which is an engineering college in Delhi, and uh, I'd never really been exposed to the social sciences. And the way they teach at Oxford is very different. So they have something called the tutorial system, where oftentimes you are in tutorial sessions with your tutor, so one-on-one, or maybe two of you and one tutor. Sometimes the tutor will offer you a glass of sherry or port while you're discussing an essay and the arguments and ideas that you want to sort of defend. It's a very different way of education from anything I'd experienced in India. And then the fact that I could actually successfully finish both my programs and eventually my doctoral dissertation was published as a book. So I'd have to say that that period is probably the most interesting, full of learning, excitement, discovery, learning more about myself as a person also. So that was great fun. And of course, Oxford is where I met my wife, Soumya.
It's lovely how you all both mentioned that the tutorial part and how you all met each other. That's amazing. All right. Now, my next question is, after studying abroad for so many years, what made you come back to India and pursue a career with the Tatas?
So when I was away from 89 to 94, bang in the middle of that period, 91 was when the economic reforms program started in India. So the India I had left, which is very sort of focused on socialism and strict controls in the private sector, was changing quite dramatically by the time I'd finished my doctoral program at Oxford. So I was clear that I wanted to come back and understand what was changing in India. I think the best way to do that was really to do it through the eyes of a large corporate. Tata's were the biggest corporate house in India. So I wrote into them from England, in fact, and they invited me for an interview for something called the Tata Administrative Service, which is the fast track general management cadre of the Tata Group. And I came back, interviewed, was selected, and that sort of started me off on a whole new journey of discovery and learning in the corporate world after having finished my academic program. Another element in Tata's which attracted me to the group was the then chairman Ratan Tata's strong commitment to the environment. And a large part of my doctoral dissertation was actually on the politics of the environment. So to find a home in a group that was serious about environmental protection, I think also played its part in influencing my decision to join the Tatas.
All right. Now, with that, I think you answered a bit of a next question as well. So that was the first segment. Now we're moving to the work life and more. So in the second segment, my first question was, how did you get the job at the Tatas? And I think you just answered that. So we can, if you want, you can elaborate on it a bit more.
I actually was part of a mid-year intake into the Tata Administrative Service. They'd very rarely done that prior to that period, and I don't think they ever did it again. So I actually interviewed with the TAS in September, and I joined the Tatas in January. Very different from the rest of the TAs recruitments they normally do from the business schools across India. Um, but the thing that I remember about the TS interview was it was chaired by Ratan Tata, and I think a big part of my later working for him was the fact that he was actually the chair of the interview committee that selected me, and it opened up the possibility that I could work with him. And to work for the chairman of India's largest group, as I then did for 12 years, I think was an awesome experience, which was set up by that interview that I had with him for the Tata Administrative Service.
Definitely. It sounds amazing. All right. Now you've done a lot and a huge variety of assignments at the Tatas. What has been your most special and memorable assignment?
I'd have to say the stint I had for a little over 2 years as managing director of Tata Teleservices Maharashtra Limited. This was a publicly listed company. It used to be called HughesTele.com, and Tata's acquired that company. And overnight, I was sort of catapulted into the top job there. Prior to that, I was actually working for Mr. Tata as his chief of staff. And to suddenly move from a relatively small setup to being the head of a company which had at that time, I think something like 3,000 employees and maybe up to 10,000 feet on street and retail sort of staff and so on, was a very different sort of operational set of challenges. And I became a CEO before the age of 40. And to have that kind of responsibility thrust on one at that age was awesome. This was a publicly listed company, so you had to have public AGMs, you had to deal with shareholders, you had to take analyst calls, deal with investors who were looking at your stock on a daily basis. You had to motivate your team. We had a relatively young workforce, so that helped. But we also had a bunch of very senior officers in the company who, initially, when I joined, were very skeptical about my likelihood of success. So I think all the challenges and the ways in which we motivated each other and worked really hard to take the company to a leadership position in the telecom space across mobility, landline, and broadband services was great fun and huge amount of learning for me. So that would probably be the most memorable period of my time in the Tatas.
Definitely. All right. Now you worked with Cyrus Mistry and Ratan Tata. What were the key learnings you got from them?
I think both in their own way were remarkable individuals, are remarkable individuals. Very down to earth, very grounded people at one level, even though they've held some of the most senior positions in the corporate world. No sort of arrogance or a sense of entitlement to either of them. Very interested and curious about the world. And in Tata's, you have to be like that if you have to manage so many different industries. I mean, the group is in practically every industry in India, as they say, from salt to software. So you have to have a curious mind. Both very interested in high technology, which I think is again critical in today's world, particularly digital technology. I think very similar people in many ways. Great sense of humor, very easy to work with. And that last part, I think, was what really endeared both of them to the teams that worked with them. And they've had people who've been very loyal to them because of their sense of being very easy to deal with, not high-handed in their attitude and work culture, and giving you a lot of space to do your own thing and then deliver results. So thoroughly enjoyed working with both of them. And I think the most important element is no matter how old you are or how senior you get in a business, you should always have that questioning attitude and a willingness to learn more. And I think both of them had that, and that's something I really learned from them.
Definitely, that sounds like something you now would take from a person, two people as inspirational as them. All right. Now you were with the Tatas for around 23 years. What prompted you to leave and become an entrepreneur?
I think by the time I was finishing up at Tata's, I'd pretty much contributed whatever I could. The group had been very kind to me. I'd served in many different roles, some of them unique roles in the Tata group. I'd been at the senior most positions within the group and within companies. There's relatively little left for me to contribute. On the other hand, there was so much that I thought I could do in the broader Indian corporate landscape. And I think at that time in 2018, one felt that the Indian market is just getting ready for this new thematic of ESG, environment, social, and governance. So, along with a few colleagues from in fact the Tata Group, we set up an entity called Ecube. And as the name suggests, it's drawn from the three E's: engage and empower for ESG. And really, our mantra is to deploy a series of platforms that will help corporate India to perform better on ESG metrics going forward. So we're looking at public equities fund, we're looking at a debt instrument for climate finance, we're looking at the private equity venture capital space. So we're looking at a bunch of platforms that we think can advance the cause of better ESG in India. And there's enough research to show that better ESG is correlated with better financial performance and better stock market returns. So we think in India in particular, concerns around corporate governance, concerns around climate change are going to be very important drivers in moving the ESG agenda forward. And given my personal interest and that of my colleagues around the environment, around corporate governance, we felt there was a lot that we could do to shape that agenda going forward. So that's really what the intention is.
All right. Right. I think that this leads me to my next question is you have a great team at EQ. What were the key challenges you encountered while coming up with such a stellar team on board?
Actually, I didn't have much of a challenge because they were all sort of like-minded. All of us felt that we'd, achieved a lot in our life. We'd been in senior positions in industry. Now it was time to give back. And all of us were driven by similar considerations around concerns about where the environmental agenda is headed, concerns around global warming and climate change, concerns around corporate governance. And we felt we'd learned so much in our careers, it made sense to come together and try and shape the discourse going forward and give back the benefit, whatever experience we as a team had had and individually. So it was actually quite easy to sort of propagate the idea, and all of us came together very quickly, in fact.
All right. That's great. All right. So my next question related to eCube is what's your vision for eCube in say the next 5 years?
So, as I said, Ecube was really created to help corporate India advance the cause of ESG, help it perform better on ESG metrics. And across each of the platforms that we are building, whether it's public equities, private equity, debt, stewardship going forward, we'd really like to be able to be in a position where Indian corporates feel that there is an entity that recognizes the challenges they face and that can offer a helping hand. And if we can help to transform the landscape, initially by selecting a few visionary, well led companies that want to do better, and then through that, try and create a catalytic effect so that many more companies, in a sense, join the bandwagon and start understanding why it's important and how they can do better. That would be great. That would be a real contribution that my team and I feel we could make to improve the corporate governance and ESG landscape in India.
All right, perfect. Okay, now we're done with the first two sections, and we're now moving to the more fun yet business and inspirational inclined questions. So, my first question is, who has been your greatest inspiration, and why is this person your inspiration?
I think I've gone on record on this many times in the past that I'd have to say very easily head and shoulders above most other people is Mahatma Gandhi. And I think the reason really is uh, the fact that you have in him a role model, somebody who could be extremely transparent and candid about their life, about the challenges they faced, and really communicate so effectively with the audiences that he wanted to touch, which is really the people of India, in a giant struggle for freedom, and to be able to motivate and bring them on board and to really follow him. I mean, the way he really put himself out there in the public eye and was able to create this groundswell of support, hugely inspirational, and so much that India can learn from him, especially today, given the kinds of challenges this country faces.
Definitely, definitely. He is, at the end of the day, the father of our nation. All right. So, my next question is, which book inspires you the most?
So it's got to be his book, which is actually what led me to read a bit more about him and learn about his life. So he wrote his autobiography, The Story of My Experiments with Truth. And that has really been, I think, one of the most moving books that I've ever read. And to imagine a public leader being so honest and candid about their life and their frailties, their anxieties, the mistakes they made was very, very inspiring to see somebody open up in that fashion and then explain why they had the agenda that they did. Was very, very moving and transformational.
Did that inspire you to write a book, with about your experience as well? Or
In some ways, yes. I have to say, I tried to be fairly candid and transparent in my own book. And I have to share with you that my mother asked me why I was writing essentially an autobiography at a relatively young age. So, maybe there was a little bit of the Gandhian inspiration in that because he wrote his autobiography when he was, I guess, into his 50s, probably. So I don't think age needs to stop you as long as you have an interesting story to tell.
so, what has been your favorite motto?
um, a couple of, I mean, when you talk about mottos, I think a couple of phrases that
Yeah,
one sort of
inspired.
hears a lot. Um, uh, so, you always hear this phrase, the grass is always greener on the other side. Um, And I tend to sort of flip it around and say that, this is true of all of us in whatever walk of life we are in, whatever career we try and get into, the way we perform in school. You always think there's somebody out there who's doing better than you or is in a better situation, performing better, getting better rewards, getting higher incentives. And I can tell you that that feeling never goes away for any human being. I worked very closely with successive Tata Group chairmen. Even if you're chairman of Tata's, you're constantly looking over your shoulder to see what your board thinks about your performance. You are concerned sometimes about what people in government may think about what your companies are doing. You get into problems with shareholders in foreign markets who don't like the way you're running certain companies. There's always going to be pressure. And they probably look at other chairmen in other companies in other parts of the world and think, gosh, those guys are so much better off than we are. They don't have all these stakeholders to answer to. And the fact is, it actually doesn't really change for anybody. All of us, every human being, in whatever walk of life, at whatever stage of evolution, you will always feel that the grass is greener somewhere else. And the thing is, don't get taken in by that. Ultimately, you have to, in a sense, be answerable to yourself, feel that you've done the best that you could, and then be content. uh, don't sort of worry about what your neighbor is doing or how much better off they seem to be. Each person has his own or her own problems, and you've got to just be comfortable in your own skin and not let the rest of the world distract you from the best that you can be as an individual.
Definitely, definitely. All right, this leads me to one of my last few questions is to what advice would you give to young aspiring students out there that want to take in or move towards a similar career path as yours?
So I'm not sure that my career path is a very conventional career path. I was very, very privileged to sort of be in certain situations at particular points of time where I was able to learn a lot. The one thing I would say, though, is that you should always be open to learning and to learning new things. Never sort of closet yourself into one function or one sort of groove, unless you're very, very passionate about a subject. And if you want to be a rocket scientist, you want to learn everything there is to learn about engine technology and so on, that's fine. But otherwise, be open to influences, be open to the opportunities the world offers, pick up hobbies as you go along in life, learn new languages. If you keep yourself open to inspiration and influences, you will then probably have a better chance of landing something that really suits you, that is in sync with your profile, your personality, that puts you in the company of a group of people you enjoy working with, gives you bosses who are comfortable working with you and with whom you feel comfortable working. So set yourself up for being open to influences. Don't sort of closet yourself, don't shut the door, don't align yourself with only one individual or one sort of work sphere. That can be limiting, and potentially down the line, when your mentor or the person you've attached your fortunes to disappears for whatever reason, you may be left high and dry. So, learn to experiment and always have a learning attitude. Try and be curious about things and learn as much as you can about the world we live in, because it's so full of diversity and complexity and joy. And you will find your niche if you give yourself time.
Yes, definitely. Even I myself require that advice. So, my last question is if you were to write an autobiography about yourself, like a complete autobiography without being candid, what would you name it?
I'm not sure now what I would name it. I'll have to give it some thought, but I can certainly tell you that my previous autobiography was not supposed to be initially called The Brand Custodian. It was supposed to be called Tata to All That. So it was really an effort to put the Tata face behind me and look to the future. But I'll have to give it some thought about the next one. And I think it'll be a function of all the experience I'm now gathering. And it'll probably take me maybe the better part of the next decade before I'm ready to write the next one.
All right. And my last question is, did you enjoy being a part of this interview?
Yes, indeed. It's nice to interact with young people, and I hope through you one gets to put out one's thoughts to other young people. So certainly,
Definitely.
I've really enjoyed this, and thank you for your questions. It's forced me
Thank
to
you for
think a little
coming.
bit.
Thank you for coming to this interview. I'm pretty sure a lot of young people out there would definitely take the advice you've given, especially to the aspiring students out there who want to follow an unconventional career path, as you said. Um, yeah, thank you so much for coming. I hope you enjoyed.